the woman they tried to erase. Aurora's pulse quickened as she stepped aboard Calum's luxury yacht. Her satin dress fluttered in the ocean breeze, her belly heavy with 8 months of pregnancy. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration of love, of family, of their future. Candles flickered across the deck, champagne flowed freely, and everything appeared picture-perfect. But beneath the sparkling surface, something felt wrong. Calum's demeanor was too calm, too distant. Denka, his longtime friend, radiated a detached coldness that didn't fit the occasion. When Aurora approached them, she caught only the end of their hushed conversation, just enough to make her heart stutter. "We can't back out now," Calum whispered. "She'll be gone soon," Denka replied with venomous finality. Panic gripped Aurora. Before she could react, Denka turned to her with a cruel smirk that made Aurora's blood freeze. It wasn't just malicious, it was final. Then, with ruthless precision, Denka shoved her. Aurora screamed, but her voice was lost beneath the yacht's roaring engine as icy water swallowed her whole. The weight of her unborn child pulled her deeper. She thrashed in the freezing dark, lungs burning, hope fading. Above her, the yacht sailed on. Calum didn't glance back. He simply lit a cigar, its ember the only flicker of warmth in his hollow, merciless eyes. Denka's triumphant laughter echoed over the waves. But Aurora refused to die. Her skin burned from the cold, yet her will blaze hotter. She whispered Calum's name like a curse and fought to survive. Just when darkness threatened to consume her, a pair of strong arms yanked her from the sea. A fisherman pulled her onto his battered boat, where she coughed up seawater and gasped for air. Weak and disoriented, she still felt a powerful kick inside her. Her child was alive. "You're safe?" the fisherman said, his voice rough but steady. That word, safe, ignited something deep inside her. She had been betrayed, discarded, left for dead, but she wasn't defeated. Calum thought she was gone forever, that she had vanished without a trace. But he had underestimated her fire. Her journey led her to Ilias, her estranged half-brother, and a ruthless investigative journalist with secrets of his own. When he opened the door to her, there were no questions, no tears, just action. He handed her a folder thick with evidence. Forged medical reports, bribed doctors, fake diagnoses. Denka and Calum hadn't just tried to erase her. They had rewritten her existence. But what stunned Aurora most was a trust fund, $1 billion inheritance meant for her unborn child, hidden by Calum's late father. According to legal documents, only a legitimate child born in wedlock could claim it. Aurora's baby was that heir. That was why they wanted her erased. Not murdered, not ruined, but legally vanished. A missing person couldn't claim inheritance. A fetus couldn't inherit. Their plan was meticulous, but flawed. Fueled by truth and vengeance, Aurora watched surveillance footage of Denka prancing around her former home, wearing her clothes, drinking from her glasses, pretending to carry Calum's child. Calum, meanwhile, portrayed the grieving widower to the media, earning sympathy through deception. But Aurora saw through it. With Ilias at her side, she began to construct her revenge. Not chaos, but calculation. She wouldn't scream. She would dismantle. Piece by piece, she would unravel the empire they'd built on betrayal. She started moving funds from her hidden trust, investing them under ghost identities. With Ilias's help, she quietly bought shares in Calum's company, just enough to observe without being seen. She didn't want spectacle. She wanted precision. Every move was a chess piece placed with care, leading to a final blow no one would see coming. And then came the perfect stage, the Gola Gala, a glitzy celebration where Denka would reveal her fake pregnancy to high society. Cameras, chandeliers, champagne. It would be the performance of her life. Aurora would be there, but not as herself. Ilias had commissioned a mask of black diamonds, catching light like a fractured night sky. She practiced wearing it, perfecting her silence, her presence. She wasn't a broken woman who fell from a yacht. She was reborn, cold, sharp, radiant. Make sure they never forget this moment, Ilias told her. She planned to let Denka bask in her lies, soak in the spotlight, believe herself invincible. And then, in that perfect moment, when all eyes were on her, when every camera flashed, Aurora would pull the floor from beneath her, but not yet, not until there was no escape, no spin, no lie strong enough to cover the truth. The gala shimmered on the horizon, the playground of the rich and reckless. But no one saw the storm coming, draped in black diamonds, silent and unstoppable, ready to leave only ruin behind. Aurora entered to the front, not hiding, but transformed. Her heels clicked against marble like echoes of forgotten memories. Eyes turned, whispers spread like wildfire, and her mask refracted light in 1,000 cutting shards. But it wasn't the mask that silenced the room. It was her eyes, cold, brilliant, merciless. The eyes of a woman no longer seeking justice. The eyes of a woman ready to claim what was rightfully hers. She was composed of dazzling fragments. Hypnotic even, but it was her eyes, cold and sharp, that truly froze a room. Haunted yet unwavering. They displaced the air, halting time itself. She moved through the ballroom like a rumor come alive, graceful, predatory, introducing herself as Madame Azra, a Dubai investor whose wealth was whispered to stretch into billions. She was too flawless for anyone to doubt her. She shook hands with men who once mocked her pain, their smug grins now trembling under the weight of her icy gaze. She exchanged pleasantries with women who once called her tears weakness, their laughter now brittle, their smiles strained. When she reached Calum, the handshake lingered too long. His fingers brushed hers with a kind of familiarity that searched for something buried, a trace in her perfume, a posture, a silent authority in her every step stirred something long dormant inside him. A flicker of recognition smothered beneath denial. His grip tightened slightly, as if searching her feature for answers. The curve of her mouth, the tilt of her head, but clarity evaded him. He knew that scent, that silence in her stare, the way her presence filled a space. And yet the truth remained just out of reach, suffocated under years of lies and facades. Beside him, Denka gripped her champagne flute so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her fake pregnancy strained awkwardly beneath the folds of her silver dress. The illusion quivered under the weight of her spiraling anxiety. Her eyes tracked the mysterious woman's every move, dread building with every heartbeat. The atmosphere shifted. It was as if the entire room began to rotate around the woman in black. Deneka's fingers dug into Calum's arm, nails sinking into his skin, though he hardly noticed, his attention still locked on the woman in front of him. Aurora tilted her head ever so slightly, her lips parting into a smile that never reached her eyes, a smile full of secrets, of promises not forgotten. Then, with perfect timing, she accidentally dropped her glass of red wine at Deneka's feet. The crimson liquid spread slowly, staining the hem of her gown like spilled blood. The shatter of crystal silenced the murmurs, pulling every gaze toward the unfolding scene. For a moment, the gala held its breath. Wine sprayed across the silk, dark and deliberate. A scarlet taunt against Deneka's fragile disguise. A collective gasp surged through the room, sharp, involuntary, as if even the air itself was pierced by what had just occurred. Calum rushed to Deneka, hands frantic but practiced. His mind was already sprinting ahead, chasing fragments he wasn't ready to face. But the woman in black had already turned, her figure dissolving into the crowd with chilling grace. She didn't flee. She flowed, deliberate, elegant, vanishing into the night like a ghost summoned solely to haunt. She left behind chaos and questions, ones that clawed at the edges of his mind. Calum's heart thundered in his chest, every beat pounding like a drum heralding doom. His thoughts spun, desperate to make sense of what had just taken place. Those eyes, the ones behind the mask, they burned into his memory, merciless and familiar. A specter of someone he once loved and never truly laid to rest. A ghost of guilt and regret he believed he'd buried deep enough to forget. That night, the mansion loomed hollow and suffocating. Every shadow seemed to stretch farther than it should. Every creak of the floor echoed like whispers from another time. He wandered its halls like a man hunted by memory, unable to shake the weight of those eyes, or the certainty that she had been there, watching, waiting, planning. Morning light trickled weakly through the heavy curtains of his office, painting long bars across the polished wood of his desk. He opened a drawer, not looking for anything specific, perhaps distraction, perhaps comfort, and found something instead. A sketch, yellow with time, carefully folded and hidden. Her face stared back at him, drawn in pencil lines so precise they might have been etched by memory itself, from a time when love still felt pure, before it was tainted by greed and betrayal. He had burned every photo, deleted every trace, erased it from his life as thoroughly as he could. But this had survived, tucked away in the quiet corners of his past, patiently waiting to rise again. His hands trembled as he unfolded it. The paper crackled beneath his fingers, each line of her face reigniting emotions long buried. Then came the envelope, plain, unmarked, slipped silently under his door sometime in the night. Inside, a single note, written in elegant handwriting that chilled his spine. The truth always returns. Panic coiled in his gut like lead. He opened his laptop. His inbox was flooded. Anonymous emails, each one more damning than the last. Screenshots, accusations, emails exposing transactions he prayed would stay buried. Words like fraud, embezzlement, betrayal circled him like vultures, merciless and closing in. Investors began asking questions, their tone polite but firm. Trust cracking. Board members exchanged worried glances during meetings. The stock dipped just enough to sting, enough to hint at the storm brewing. In his office's suffocating quiet, surrounded by the ghosts of choices he could no longer undo, Calum's hands shook as he scrolled through mounting evidence. Every file, every image, a piece of the life he tried to destroy. Somehow, somewhere, she was pulling the strings, unraveling the empire he'd built on deception, thread by thread. Miles away, Aurora sat in a secret apartment, the glow of multiple screens casting an eerie light across her face. Her features were sharp with resolve. On one screen, Calum's stock graph bled downward. Every drop, a small triumph in her quiet war. Another screen displayed his calendar, every appointment laid bare for her to exploit. Before her sat a stack of documents, files, blueprints, financials, contracts, all marked in red ink, annotated with weaknesses and flaws. Her eyes never blinked. Her hands never faltered. It wasn't enough. Watching his panic, watching the cracks spread. It didn't erase the scar he'd carved into her soul. Didn't ease the loneliness that gnawed at her on sleepless nights. The betrayal that left her bleeding alone. Her heart had broken once, shattered too unevenly to ever heal whole. Now she wanted more than revenge. She wanted his empire to feel every fracture, to collapse under the weight of its own lies. She leaned forward, opened another folder. More evidence spilled across the screen. Emails, wire transfers, incriminating photos. Slowly, deliberately, she became the storm they never saw coming. A storm of precision and patience. Every move she made was calculated to dismantle what they had built. And yet, despite the progress, something still felt unfinished, even hollow. Her thoughts kept circling back to Elias, Calum's brother, the only one who had ever whispered the truth when no one else dared. He had always been the wild card, the shadow lurking behind the flawless facade, the one who had promised to help her uncover everything they thought they'd buried. Her phone buzzed on the table, cutting through the heavy silence in the room. It was a message from him. "Come now. I found it." The words struck her like electricity, filling her with urgency. Without hesitation, she grabbed her coat and stepped into the night. The city lights blurred past as she drove toward the safe house where Elias waited. When she arrived, he stood by the window, a silhouette against the faint glow of streetlights below. He said nothing at first, offered no explanations. He simply placed a photo on the table between them and stepped back. His expression was unreadable, but weighed down with implication. Aurora stared at it, her breath catching as the room seemed to fall away. In the photograph, a young Danica sat beside an older man, his hand placed possessively on her thigh, a smirk twisting his mouth. Around her neck gleamed a necklace, its intricate pattern unmistakable. It was the same necklace Calum had given Aurora years ago, once a symbol of love he swore was real. But seeing it here, in this context, transformed it into something grotesque. The realization hit her like a freight train, tearing through her defenses, leaving her raw. This wasn't just betrayal. It was ownership, manipulation, and far darker secrets than she had imagined. Her already shattered heart splintered further beneath the weight of what she now understood. She didn't need to ask. She knew. It was Calum's father, the same man who had died suddenly just months before Calum married Denka. His death had come with suspicious convenience, neatly sweeping away any scandal. The pieces clicked into place with nauseating clarity. Each revelation was more devastating than the last. Elias handed her a second folder, thicker and heavier than the first. Its contents spilled out like venom. Bank transfers to offshore accounts, receipts for extravagant gifts, travel logs of discreet rendezvous. Denka had been his mistress for years. A secret so well kept it might as well have been written in invisible ink. Aurora's voice trembled as she whispered, "Calum knew Denis?" Elias nodded slowly. Grimly, Calum hadn't married Denka for love, not for healing, not for stability. He had married her to bury a secret so toxic it could ruin not just him, but his entire legacy. He had known she was his father's lover, and rather than face that truth, he silenced it, with a ring, with wealth, with complicity. Their marriage was not built on love, or even convenience. It was a transaction, a pact bound by lies and greed. But there was more, something even more vile. The pregnancy Denka had flaunted so proudly, a complete fabrication. Elias had proof, medical records, forged signatures, bribed doctors. The baby bump, a high-end silicone prosthetic, convincing enough to fool everyone, except those who dare to look closely. She removed it each night like a stage prop. There was no child, no future. Only a lie engineered to grant Denka power over Calum, his empire, and worst of all, his guilt. Aurora could barely breathe. The air was thick and suffocating around her. The betrayal wasn't just from Calum, not just Denka. It came from an entire family, one that watched her suffer, witnessed her pain, and said nothing. They let her believe she'd lost because she wasn't enough, not strong enough, not worthy enough, while they guarded their secrets and sacrificed her dignity to protect their pride. Her hands shook as she began packing the documents herself, arranging every file, every receipt, every lie into careful stacks. She treated them like sacred relics, fragments of a truth they tried so desperately to bury. When it was done, she sealed the papers into an envelope. Her movements were deliberate, ceremonial. The weight of it all was nearly unbearable, but her grip was steady. She knew exactly what this represented. Not revenge, but justice. For the first time since this nightmare began, Aurora felt something other than fury or despair. She felt resolve. Quiet, unshakable. The storm she had become wasn't just for her anymore. It was for every moment she was made to feel small. Every tear shed in silence. Every lie spoken to keep her down. Now the truth would rise. On the front of the envelope, in bold red ink that almost burned to the paper, she wrote, "For shareholders only." The words were simple, but devastating, a promise sealed in ruthless finality. Elias stood beside her, placing a tentative hand on her shoulder. His touch was gentle, almost hesitant, like he feared disrupting the storm inside her. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice low but steady, searching her face for any sign of hesitation. She nodded once, firmly. Her eyes were unwavering, her chin lifted. But inside, where no one could see, her heart wasn't breaking anymore. It wasn't shattering or collapsing beneath betrayal. It was rebuilding, brick by brick, stronger, sharper, more dangerous. Because this wasn't just revenge. Revenge was too small a word, too narrow to define what she had become. This was truth. This was reckoning. For every person who thought they could erase her, silence her, rewrite her story and walk away unscathed. Every lie they told, every manipulation they orchestrated, every time they dismissed her as powerless, it would all come crashing down. Aurora looked into the mirror. The reflection staring back wasn't the woman who cried on hospital floors, clinging to pain like a lifeline. It wasn't the woman who begged for justice from a system that refused to hear her. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone else entirely, someone who radiated control, power, retribution. Her lawyer had called that morning. His voice carried cautious triumph. Her identity had been fully restored. Her name reinstated in all the documents from which they tried to erase her. The will, once disputed and buried, now reaffirmed beyond contest. Her child's inheritance secured, protected. And Denika's fraud, every forged report, every illegal transfer, every whispering lie, was legally documented, airtight, ready to explode like a bomb in the heart of their empire. Everything was in place. But Aurora wasn't going to do it quietly. Silence was no longer her weapon. She was no one's victim. No tragic story to pity. No footnote to erase. She was something far more dangerous. She was a storm. She contacted Calum's greatest rival, Mr. Roth, a man whose hatred for Calum ran deeper than mere competition. A man Calum had mocked in public, undermined in business, humiliated at parties. Mr. Roth answered immediately. His tone shifted from skepticism to intrigue as Aurora laid out the evidence. She didn't plead. She offered ammunition. By the end of the call, Roth's voice held a vicious satisfaction, the kind born of opportunity and vengeance. He promised to act fast, loud, devastating. Aurora allowed herself the briefest smile, cold and precise. The puzzle pieces were falling into place. And when the storm hit, nothing would be left untouched. Aurora had given Roth something better than revenge, dominion, not just a seat at the table, but control, real, tangible power over the empire Calum had built on lies. Together, they crafted a plan so exact it felt like art. The shareholders' meeting was set for next Friday, a spectacle designed to display Calum's supposed success, his leadership through turbulent waters. Denika would be there too, glowing beneath chandeliers, her fake belly positioned for maximum sympathy. They'd parade their numbers, unaware the ground beneath them was about collapse. And then Aurora would walk in, not as a discarded wife, not as the silenced woman, but as the architect of their downfall, the one holding the pen that would sign their ruin. The press still believed she was dead, a whispered tragedy lost in gossip columns. But cameras would roll when she stepped into the light, her presence powerful enough to freeze time. The silence that followed would shatter like glass. The world would learn what happens when you try to erase the woman who built the foundation beneath your feet, the woman whose name and suffering fueled your rise, only to be thrown away without a second thought. Her final move was simple, but devastating. She retrieved the suit she never got to wear, the one tailored for the day Calum promised to introduce her as his equal, his partner. Now she wore it not as his wife, not as his victim, but as a storm that would unravel him thread by thread, lie by lie. Her heels clicked like a metronome against the boardroom's polished floor, each step slicing through the air like a countdown. Ahead, Denika laughed with shareholders, unaware of the coming reckoning. Behind her, Calum radiated confidence, oblivious to the cracks forming beneath him. Then came the whispers. Heads turned. Aurora walked forward, every movement purposeful, every breath measured. Her posture radiated power. And as she closed in, the storm arrived. With every step, she drew closer, closer to the collapse of the illusion they had so carefully maintained. One step nearer to the unraveling of truth. One step nearer to exposing everything they had built upon lies. When Aurora entered the grand hall of the shareholders' assembly, silence crashed down like an avalanche, swallowing every sound, every breath, until all that remained was the weight of her presence. The white dress she wore floated around her like a ghostly shroud, its soft fabric cascading in waves that shimmered with an almost otherworldly glow. It gently wrapped around her pregnant belly, emphasizing the life growing within her, a life they had tried so desperately to erase. Beneath the unforgiving glare of the chandeliers, she appeared ethereal yet unyielding, a vision of grace and strength that left no room for doubt or dismissal. Every eye in the room turned to her, as if pulled by an invisible force. Their stares locked on her like moths caught in the blaze of fire. Murmurs died mid-sentence. Conversations were cut off, words left hanging in the air, unfinished, vanishing into nothing. A single breath sliced through the silence, sharp, jagged, electric, echoing off the marble walls like a crack of lightning across a stormy sky. Calum's hand twitched involuntarily. The crystal glass he held slipped from his fingers, falling slowly before shattering against the marble floor with a sound so loud it echoed like a broken promise. Denka went pale. Her carefully composed facade crumbled before everyone's eyes. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound escaped. Her breath caught between shock and horror. She stared at Aurora as if seeing a ghost, someone she thought she had buried deep under layers of deception, wiped away and forgotten, only to rise again, fiercer and brighter than ever. Aurora didn't blink. She didn't falter. Instead, she moved with the crowd as if the air itself belonged to her. Every step was deliberate, every motion calculated, radiating a calm authority that froze everyone else in place. She was unshakable, untouchable, a force of nature defying comprehension. Her gaze swept the room, still deadly, piercing into every soul brave enough to meet her eyes. What emanated from her wasn't anger. It was something far more devastating. Certainty. Calum's mouth twitched. His jaw moved soundlessly as he tried to speak, but no words came. His lie, the one he had nurtured, defended, and built a life upon, now stood before them all, alive, undeniable, glowing with truth and purpose. Denka clutched the edge of the table beside her, her knuckles white with strain, fighting to remain standing as the ground beneath her seemed to tilt, treacherous and unstable. No one moved. No one breathed. The room had fallen into a collective paralysis, suffocating, as if time itself had paused in reverence to the storm that was unfolding before them. Aurora didn't need to speak. Her presence roared louder than any voice ever could. A symphony of revelations, of lies turned to ash, of truths too heavy to ignore. Each of her steps echoed like thunder. Each glance illuminated the darkest corners of their guilt. Her silence thundered, filling the vast space with unspoken accusations, unanswered questions, and revelations that spared nothing and no one. This wasn't a confrontation. It was annihilation. And as she stood there, bathed in both shadow and light, the world held its breath, waiting for what would happen next. She didn't say a word. She simply stopped. Before Calum, Denka, the board of directors frozen at their polished mahogany table, the press clutching notepads and recorders, all eyes fixed on her with a mix of awe and dread. The room leaned forward as one, caught in the gravity of the inevitable. Every breath was held, as though even exhaling could shatter the fragile tension suspended in the air. Calum's heartbeat thundered so loudly he feared the walls might echo with it. Every pulse pounded like a drumbeat foretelling his fall. Beneath the table, his fists clenched, nails digging deep into flesh. His palms were sweating, but even this small attempt to control couldn't stop the trembling that coursed through him. Beside him, Denka's shaking hands betrayed her panic. Her fingers twitched nervously as she fidgeted with the hem of her dress. The carefully constructed mass of confidence was slipping from her face with every passing second. Aurora stood before them, calm and collected, like a statue carved from ice, unshaken by the chaos swirling around her. Slowly, deliberately, she reached into her immaculate white leather handbag. The motion was smooth, unhurried, stretching the moment until the anticipation was nearly unbearable. Out came a small black recorder, unremarkable in appearance, yet powerful enough to destroy everything they had built. She pressed play without ceremony. The sharp click of the button sliced through the silence like a blade. For a moment, there was nothing, only the void of silence, stretching out like an endless abyss. And then his voice filled the room, smooth and honeyed, using betrayal. "I swear to you, Denka. Trust her. I promise." The words hung in the air like a poisonous gas, seeping into every corner of the room, suffocating everyone who heard them. The room froze, statuesque, eyes widening and faces twisting in shock. Cameras flashed in a frenzy. Reporters exchanged glances laced with disbelief, unsure whether this unfolding nightmare was real or some cruel fabrication. But Aurora remained motionless. Her expression was serene, almost attached, as if she were merely observing the inevitable collapse of a fragile house of cards. The recording continued. His voice again, but colder now. The charm gone, replaced by a chilling indifference. She's just a burden now. That child was never supposed to happen. A collective gasp swept across the room, like a wave crashing into the shore. A faint cry escaped from one of the shareholders, a woman who once praised Aurora's contributions to the company. Her voice trembled beneath the weight of the revelation. Then Denka's voice played, soft serpentine, laced with venom and calculation. Just make sure she disappears before the child is born. The company will be ours. You and me. The finality in her tone sent shivers down spines. The casual cruelty of her words cut deeper than any knife. The air thickened, pressing down on everyone like a suffocating weight, making it hard to breathe, to think, to deny the truth that now stared them in the face. The walls seemed to close in on Calum. The once glorious boardroom now felt like a gilded prison. The opulence mocked him as the foundation of his empire crumbled beneath his feet. He stared at the recorder like it was alive, a coiled serpent in Aurora's hand, ready to strike. Denka lunged suddenly, desperation propelling her like a cornered animal. But Aurora stepped back gracefully, her movements fluid and calculated, keeping the device just out of reach. "Not yet," she said. Her voice was icy, each word sharp enough to cut glass. She pressed another button without hesitation. More voices, more lies, more secrets laid bare before their eyes. A new recording filled the room, Denka pretending to sob in a doctor's office. Her voice trembled with feigned sorrow. "There's no heartbeat," she whispered. "I lost a baby." Another gasp. Disbelief mingled with horror as the truth unraveled, thread by thread. Then another voice, cold and clinical. "Her friend. But you were never pregnant. You faked everything." The accusation landed like a bomb, detonating any last shred of composure remaining in the room. The quiet murmurs erupted into frantic whispers as board members exchanged panicked glances. Their faces had gone pale with shock. The truth had come, merciless and undeniable, staining their once untouched empire with the colors of deception and corruption. Aurora pressed the final recording. Her finger hovered with confidence over the button, releasing Calum's voice one last time. This time, he was boasting to a friend about embezzling company funds to finance Denka's luxurious lifestyle. His arrogance was laid bare for all to hear. The room spun. His words crashed down like a collapsing ceiling. Then came silence. A silence so thick it felt tangible, heavy with judgment, betrayal, and dread. Eyes darted between Calum and Denka, searching for answers that no longer existed. Aurora reached once more into her bag, her movements deliberate. She slammed the thick envelope onto the table with theatrical finality, the sound cracking through the silence like thunder. "Legal documents," she announced, her voice slicing to the tension like a blade honed to perfection. "Would you like to read them aloud?" Calum swallowed hard, his Adam's apple jerking visibly as he searched for words that simply wouldn't come. Denka instinctively stepped back, her heels clicking in panic across the marble floor. But Aurora wasn't even close to finished. "Not yet," she said again, her tone resolute, commanding the room like a conductor orchestrating a symphony of destruction. Denka spun around, eyes wild with panic, searching for any exit, any way out of the carnage she helped create. But Aurora was already there, blocking her path with a calm authority that left no room for retreat. Her gaze locked onto Denka's like iron bars, unyielding and absolute. The room held its breath. Each heartbeat echoed in the deafening stillness. Denka's lips trembled, her confident mask shattered, replaced with raw terror. "Get out," she whispered, her voice shaking, laced with desperation. Aurora didn't move. She stood firm, unmoved, solid as a mountain. Her voice, cool and unwavering, cut through the room like ice-forged steel. "Why run now, Denka? Didn't you always love being the center of attention?" The cameras clicked incessantly, flashes strobing through the dim room, illuminating the unraveling chaos. With methodical grace, Aurora drew a stack of photos from her folder and let them scatter across the table. The glossy print slid like shards of shattered glass across the polished surface. "Recognize these?" she asked, voice dripping with disdain, each word sharp enough to bleed. The images told a far darker story than any accusation could. Denka, with Calum's father, laughing in candlelight, kissing in shadow corners, whispering secrets that should have remained buried. Silence gripped the room so tightly it seemed even the air refused to move. Calum looked gut-punched. Disbelief and disgust twisted his features. His hands gripped the edge of the table like a lifeline. "This isn't true," Denka mumbled, her voice faltering under the weight of exposure. Aurora raised a hand, silencing her with a gesture that screamed power. "Receipts," she said simply, tossing paper after paper onto a growing pile of damning evidence. Each document unraveled the web of lies they'd spun. Jewelry bought in Calum's name, sent to Denka's address. Proof inked and signed, undeniable. Denka flushed, then paled, her composure crumbling with every revelation. "It wasn't like that, no," she weakly protested, her voice so unconvincing it seemed she didn't even believe herself anymore. Aurora stepped forward, closing the distance with a grace that belied the storm inside her. "And what about the email you sent the clinic asking for fake ultrasound images?" she demanded, her voice once again cutting through the air like a honed blade. Another collective gasp rippled through the room. The audacity of Denka's deceit left even the boldest silent. "You used a fake baby to steal my life, my husband, my company," Aurora continued, her tone ice-cold but seething with contained fury. Denka shook her head frantically, words spilling incoherently, desperate attempts to redirect blame shattering against Aurora's fortress of truth. "It was his idea," she blurted, pointing a trembling finger at Calum, her eyes wide with panic. "Liar!" Aurora snapped. The word cracked like a whip, leaving no space for doubt. Her stare pinned Denka in place, burning with a resolve that made the other woman shrink. "You were poisoned, Denka. Poison that infected everything you touched. But it ends today." Her voice rose only slightly, but every syllable landed like thunder, shaking the foundation of the empire Denka and Calum had built on deceit. As Aurora stood amid the rubble of their lies, she knew this wasn't just her moment of victory. It was their moment of collapse. Denka stumbled backward, hitting the table, her carefully built illusion falling apart like a sandcastle under a brutal tide. Her massive control shattered into irreparable pieces. Aurora's finger hovered over the small black remote, calm, calculated, as if she held fate itself between her fingertips. Denka's frantic eyes darted between Aurora and the device, panic clawing up her throat. "What are you doing?" she whispered, her voice trembling with the unraveling of her facade. Aurora's lips curled into a faint, frosty smile, her expression unreadable, yet full of quiet triumph. "Ending the game," she said simply, pressing the button without hesitation. The screen behind them lit up, bathing the room in sterile light. Every head turned toward it, drawn as if by force. What they saw next stopped every heart in the room. DNA results. Clear, indisputable. The unborn child was biologically related to Calum Montgomery. The room exploded into chaos. Gasps sliced the air. Whispers collided in a frantic storm of disbelief. But Aurora didn't flinch. She stood steady, unmoved, a statue amidst a quake of collapsing lies. Calum staggered, his legs buckling as he reached for a chair like a drowning man, for a lifeboat. His mouth opened and closed, searching for words that wouldn't come. That's my child," he finally whispered, the syllables foreign, heavy with shock. Denka stood frozen. Her body was rigid, her face drained of all color. "This can't be, it's impossible," she stammered, her voice shrill with hysteria, grasping for the last threads of the lie that had once seemed indestructible. Aurora turned slowly toward her. "What will I do with all this power now?" Her movements were fluid and deliberate, calm yet resolute. Her eyes locked onto Denka with an intensity that rooted her to the spot. "So that's how it is," she said, her voice steady and unwavering, carrying the weight of truth like a hammer delivering its final blow. "You said I shouldn't have gotten pregnant, but I did, and I kept our child safe while you tried to erase us." Her words hung in the air, sharp, unflinching, cutting deeper than any blade. Calum's face turned an even paler shade as the enormity of his betrayal and the irreversible reality of what he had lost crashed into him like a tidal wave. The board members rose almost in unison, their chairs scraping against the floor with a sound that echoed ominously. Papers rustled in their hands as they exchanged urgent whispers. Their expressions were a storm of outrage, disbelief, and calculation. The foundation of trust they had placed in Calum and Denka was crumbling before them, replaced by a chasm of deceit too vast to ignore. There was never a second heir. Just lies, Aurora added quietly, her voice slicing through the murmurs like a razor. Denka collapsed into the nearest chair, her legs giving out beneath her. Her body wilted as if all the strength had drained from it. She stared blankly ahead, her mind struggling to process the wreckage of everything she had built for years. She had manipulated, schemed, and lied, spinning a web of deceit to secure her place at the top. But now, confronted by irrefutable truth, she was nothing more than a shadow, the empty echo of a woman who once believed herself untouchable. Her castle of lies was collapsing around her, brick by torturous brick. The foundation she had fortified for years crumbled into dust under the weight of truth. "I never meant to cause harm," Denka tried to say, her voice trembling as she clutched at straws, desperately pleading for mercy one last time. But her words wavered, cracking under the pressure of their own emptiness, exposing the fragility of a woman who once thought herself invincible. Aurora's eyes narrowed. Her face was as immovable as granite. "You didn't just hurt me," she snapped, her voice slicing through the room like a blade honed to perfection. "You tried to replace me, erase me, destroy every trace of my existence. But your lies couldn't kill the truth." Each syllable landed with precision and intent, leaving no room for denial or evasion. Cameras flashed endlessly, capturing every second of the unfolding drama. Their lenses were trained on Aurora as if she were the sun itself, radiating an intensity that blinded those who dared to look away. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notepads, their pens racing to document the seismic shift taking place before them. When the evidence was laid bare, photos, documents, recordings, DNA results, Aurora stepped forward, her voice rising above the chaos like a command. "My child is the rightful heir, not your fantasy," she declared. Her words echoed off the walls, resonating to the stunned silence of the room. Calum looked at her, utterly shattered. His face was twisted in despair and disbelief, as if he was seeing her for the first time, not as the woman he had rejected, but as the force of nature she had become. "Aurora, I didn't know," he muttered, his voice barely audible through the storm inside him. "You knew," she cut him off sharply. Her voice held a quiet fury. "You just didn't care." The finality of her words hung in the air, heavy, suffocating, sealing his fate with a truth he could no longer outrun. Denka covered her face with trembling hands, her shoulders shaking as the full weight of her downfall crashed onto her. Her power was gone, stripped away piece by piece, leaving her exposed and vulnerable in ways she had never imagined possible. Her plan, the intricate web of manipulation and deceit she had so carefully woven, was now in ruins, leaving only the cold, hard reality of what she had done. Aurora stood tall among the wreckage, stronger than ever. Her presence commanded both respect and awe. She swept her gaze calmly across the room, from the board members to the reporters, to the remnants of the empire they had tried to strip from her. "It's over," she said simply. Her voice resonated with authority, and in that moment, the world finally knew. The truth had been revealed, and there was no going back. Calum looked up, his face a mask of defeat, his pride shattered into pieces. But Aurora wasn't finished. She met his gaze, piercing and relentless, and asked the final question, a dagger aimed straight at the heart of everything he thought he understood. "What do you think I'll do now with all this power?" Silence returned, thick and smothering, pressing on everyone like a burial shroud. The kind of silence that precedes monumental change, when even the air itself holds its breath. One of the board members nervously cleared his throat, shattering the tension that gripped the room. "Ms. Aurora," he began, his voice steady despite the chaos swirling around them, "we would like to offer you full control of the company. The shares, the title, the power, it's all yours. You've earned it." Another board member nodded vigorously, adding, "And we will back any legal action you choose to take against those who wronged you. Whatever resources you need, whatever steps you deem necessary. We're with you." Their words hung in the air, testimony to the tectonic shift that had just occurred. The very people who once doubted her now rushed to align themselves with her undeniable strength and resolve. Calum and Denka, their fall was intoxicating. A heady surge of vindication coursed through Aurora's veins like fire, but it was wrapped in raw pain, so sharp it threatened to tear through the composure she fought to maintain. She turned to face them both. Her movements were measured, deliberate, as if she were stepping onto a stage, ready to begin the final act. The final act of this tragedy was unfolding. Calum, her former husband, once a man who seemed larger than life, now sat before her as a hollow shell. The arrogance that once cloaked him had long since been stripped away, leaving behind only the fragile remnants of someone who bet everything and lost. Denka, the woman who had lied, stolen, and betrayed, was clinging to the edge of the table for support. Her carefully crafted mask had shattered into shards far too sharp to ever be pieced back together. Aurora remembered it all. The hospital bed steeped in isolation, the fear that tore her chest, the suffocating silence pressing down on her in those darkest hours, when she believed no one would hear her cries for help. "You left me bleeding alone," she said. Her voice was low and firm, each word landing like a hammer against stone. "And now you want forgiveness?" Her gaze drifted between them, searching, perhaps for remorse, for humanity, for anything, but finding only despair and ruin. Calum said nothing. He couldn't. His mouth parted slightly, but no sound emerged. Shame gripped him, silencing every word. Denka wept uncontrollably, mascara running down her cheeks in dark rivers. Her polished facade crumbled beneath the weight of truth. "Please," she begged, her voice trembling with panic, a faint flicker of hope still clinging to the idea that mercy might yet be within reach. "Don't ruin my life." Aurora placed a protective hand on her rounded belly, her touch gentle but resolute, a grounding reminder of the present and of what she was fighting for. "You tried to ruin mine," she said. Her tone was cold, laced with sorrow, "and you almost succeeded." The room held its breath, as though even the slightest movement might tilt the scales of justice. Every eye fixed on her, awaiting the verdict that would seal their fate. One of the board members leaned forward, his voice barely audible, slicing through the tension like a blade. "You have the power to end this," he murmured, his words heavy with implication. "What will you do?" Aurora inhaled deeply, filling her lungs as if preparing to unleash the storm raging inside her. Her heart ached, not only from the wounds they had inflicted, but from the crushing awareness that revenge, while intoxicating, carried a weight far heavier than she'd imagined. Her soul tore itself in two, caught between the hunger for retribution and the haunting question, would total destruction bring her peace? She had envisioned this moment in painstaking detail, during countless sleepless nights when grief and fury were her only companions. And yet now, standing at the crossroads, lit by metaphorical lightning, it felt far heavier than any fantasy could prepare her for. Revenge, she realized, wasn't a triumph. It was a burden. With slow, deliberate steps, she walked toward Calum. Her heels echoed on the marble floor, ticking off the seconds of judgment. He looked up at her, eyes devoid of pride or confidence, replaced by a desperate plea that bordered on pity. "This is your last chance," he whispered, voice cracking under the weight of his own despair. "Please." Aurora didn't flinch. She stood tall over him, her presence commanding despite her delicate frame. Her eyes didn't blink, unreadable and storm-dark, as if two tempests loomed on the edge of the horizon. The world leaned in. Reporters tightened their grip on pens. Board members clutched their seats. Cameras captured every nuance of her face, awaiting her sentence. Would she offer the olive branch to those who never extended one to her, or would she bury them both, erasing their names from the legacy they corrupted? The answer hung in the air, fragile, uncertain, as if even Aurora hadn't yet decided. She turned. Her voice cut through the silence like ice, sharp, unwavering, cold enough to freeze the very air. "I will press charges," she declared. Each word landed with the precision of silk being sliced by a blade. The room plunged into a silence so absolute it seemed to bend the fabric of time. Even the reporters froze mid-word, pens halted above paper, too stunned to break the gravity of the moment. Aurora's gaze swept from Denka to Calum, her eyes burning with a quiet fury that left no room for doubt. "Not just against her," she said, pointing an accusing finger that seemed to pierce Denka's soul, "but against you, Calum." Shock rippled through the crowd like electricity. Gasps escaped from mouths too stunned to form words. Calum's jaw dropped, his face contorted with disbelief, as though watching the collapse of the very world he had built. And in many ways he was... "Oh no!" he choked out, stumbling forward, his despair playing on every exhausted feature. "Please don't do this." But Aurora remained firm, unmoved by his vulnerability. "You did this to yourself," she replied. Her voice was solid, every syllable heavy with the truth they could no longer deny. "You betrayed me, you stole from me, and you tried to erase our child." Her words lingered in the air like storm clouds, thick and unforgiving. As if on cue, security entered the room. Their presence was commanding yet emotionless, their movements methodical as they approached Denka. She screamed, thrashing as they grabbed her arms. Whatever composure she once clung to shattered completely. "Let me go. This is all a lie. You can't do this." Her protests echoed against the walls, sharp and desperate, but the guards didn't hesitate. They did exactly what Aurora demanded. They dragged Denka out, kicking and screaming, her voice fading into the distance like a dying echo, an empire built on lies, crumbling beneath the weight of justice. Cameras followed every step, capturing her downfall frame by frame, preserving her rage for all the world to see. Calum backed away slowly. Tears welled in his eyes. His pride dissolved into dust before everyone. "I never wanted it to end like this," he said. His voice trembled with a sadness that might have been genuine, if not for the years of deception layered behind it. "I loved you once." Aurora tilted her head slightly, as if seeing him for the first time, not as the man she once married, but as the stranger he had become. "Maybe once," she said, voice resolute and cutting. "But when I needed you most, you vanished." The blow of her words hit harder than any physical strike. His shoulders sagged under the weight of guilt and regret. Officers moved toward Calum now, their steps in unison, faces unreadable. He backed away, shaking his head, as though willing the nightmare to end. "You'll regret this," he spat, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and desperation. "You'll regret everything." But Aurora didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. She stood tall, composed, unshakable. "You regret losing control," she said. Her voice was calm, but thundered with authority. "I regret ever trusting you." And with those final words, the chapter closed, not with a bang, but with the quiet certainty of a woman who reclaimed her power piece by piece until nothing remained of the life they tried to destroy. On every screen, in every headline, across every platform, Aurora stood still in the center of chaos. Her presence was commanding, eerily calm, like someone watching a house of cards collapse, a collapse she had long known was inevitable. The world didn't shift slowly. It flipped violently, like a coin spinning midair, before crashing down on its other side. He was no longer the untouchable titan, the patriarch who once ruled over boardrooms and controlled fates. And she was no longer a whisper in the shadows. She was justice, reborn from ashes, forged in fire, and unmoved in the heart of the storm she had summoned. As Calum disappeared through the doors, swallowed by the very machine of consequence he had set in motion, Aurora neither smiled in triumph nor wept in relief. She just stood there, anchored, hands resting protectively on her rounded belly. She wasn't carrying just a child. She was carrying power, born from truth, resilience, and unshakable resolve. In the silence of a past that had haunted her for so long, the final blow had been struck. Their empire lay in ruins, but beyond that ruin was something greater. A future she would build, one free of fear, free of doubt. Cameras flashed like lightning, each shutter freezing her in time, a symbol, a force that could no longer be denied. She stood tall, her white dress swirling around her like a banner of rebellion. What once may have symbolized delicate innocence now shouted war. It was no longer a dress. It was a declaration. She was done being a victim, done being erased, done being silenced. The swell of her belly, once viewed through cruel eyes as weakness, now radiated strength, life, unshakable truth. It wasn't just part of her. It was a testament to survival, a promise to the child growing within that they would never know the pain she had endured. She turned to the press. Her gaze swept the room like a queen surveying her court, and when she spoke, her voice sliced through the noise like a honed blade. "I was the wife you tried to bury in lies," she declared. Each word rang deliberate, resonant with authority and conviction. Her eyes locked on the sea of lenses aimed at her, sharp enough to pierce glass, daring anyone to look away. "Now watch me rise." A heavy silence dropped over the room, suffocating, as if the very air had been sucked out. Then came the whispers, first quiet, then rising into a storm of awe as reporters scrambled to record every word, scribbling furiously, whispering into live mics. Headlines began forming in real time, flashing across devices before she even finished speaking. Aurora Montgomery reclaims her throne. The fall of deceit. The rise of justice. Behind her, board members exchanged nods of quiet respect. Their faces, a mix of reverence and realization. They had once dismissed her as collateral damage in Calum's grand design. Now, they saw her for what she truly was, a phoenix rising from ash, unstoppable and luminous. And as the world bore witness to her ascent, one truth crystallized. This was not the end of Aurora Montgomery's story. This was only the beginning. The woman they had underestimated, written off as a footnote in their narrative of power and deception, now stood at the center of it all, commanding loyalty with a force that brooked no dissent. "Lies didn't kill me," she continued, her voice fierce, resolute. "They forged me into something unbreakable, a power born not just of vengeance, but of survival, of strength, and unrelenting would take back what was stolen." The distant echo of Denka's cries faded into the hallways as security led her away, her voice cracking under the weight of a crumbling empire. Calum's broken expression, his hands bound behind him, his head bowed in defeat, would haunt news cycles for weeks, dissected and replayed as the downfall of a man once thought untouchable. But Aurora didn't look back. She had spent too many nights lost in the shadows, haunted by ghosts of her past. Now, she looked forward, toward a horizon she would claim, for herself, for her child, for the legacy that would rise from betrayal's ashes. What she reclaimed was more than a company. It was more than any title or stock certificate could ever contain. It was her name, once stripped and soiled, now restored to its rightful place. Her strength, tempered by agony, now unwavering. Her truth, excavated from beneath the weight of lies and manipulation, now brighter than the gold they tried to bury her under. And no boardroom conspiracy, no whispered lie, no act of erasure would ever silence her again. She would never let it be taken from her again. Yet even in victory, when cameras flashed and reporters clamored for sound bites, one question lingered in her heart. It was quiet but persistent, refusing to be silenced. The empire was hers, its keys, its assets, its influence, but at what cost? Could power truly fill the void carved in her soul by betrayal? Could it bridge the chasm, so deep it often felt bottomless? Could triumph erase the scars left by pain, the invisible wounds that pulsed just beneath the surface of her poise? These questions hovered at the edge of her mind, unanswered, yet undeniable, a reminder that even though justice had prevailed, healing was still a journey. When the screen faded to black, her voice lingered, not with the fury that had once fueled her quest for vengeance, but with a warning to those who might attempt to exploit weakness, to those who believed themselves untouchable, to those who thought they could rewrite history without consequences. Aurora had risen, and nothing would ever be the same. In the abandoned ruins of her father's empire, the one built on greed, corruption, and lies, Aurora stood tall. Her silhouette was framed by cold glass windows that had once symbolized wealth and dominance. Those windows, once gleaming reflections of ambition and excess, now mirrored only her defiance, her resolve, and the quiet storm within. The empire, assembled brick by brick with deceit as its foundation, had crumbled into a ghost of its former self, an empty shell filled with whispers of its sins. But where decay had taken root, new life would grow. Aurora vowed to build something different. An empire not of exploitation, but of integrity. Not of fear, but of justice. Not of lies, but of truth. She could almost hear the echo of lavish parties and secret deals whispering in the dark corners of those hollow halls. Their ghosts clung like smoke, caught between the walls of that gilded tomb. And yet it all felt distant, alien, as if she were peering through a fog window into fragments of someone else's life. A life she no longer recognized, let alone claimed as her own. The woman who once sought validation in crystal chandeliers and marble corridors no longer existed. Her eyes swept over the papers scattered across the floor, documents yellow with age, still heavy with secrets too dangerous to speak aloud. Contracts signed in blood-red ink. Ledgers detailing shadow transactions. Letters exchanged under the cloak of night. These remnants of a dynasty built on deception lay at her feet, discarded and powerless. Their hold on her had vanished, like a flame snuffed out by the wind. She no longer desired any of it. The wealth that bought silence, the legacy soaked in manipulation, the dominion forged through fear. She had lost too much in this world of betrayal. Innocence, trust, pieces of herself she feared might never return. The inheritance, the influence, all of it had weighed heavily on her shoulders, an invisible chain tethering her to a past she despised. But now it no longer mattered. The luxury that once represented success now appeared hollow, incapable of saving her or anyone else ensnared by a delusion. It could not mend broken hearts, heal shattered spirits, or undo the sins committed in her name. So she chose to burn it all to the ground, the wealth, the power, the empire itself. Let the gilded cage collapse under the weight of her decision, reduced to ashes and memory. Because from those ashes, she would rise again, not as an heiress to corruption, but as an architect of redemption. Right then and there, she made her choice to wield her inheritance differently, to transform the tools of oppression into instruments of liberation. With money stained by evil, she would build sanctuary for women harmed by powerful men like her father. Women like her, silenced, erased, left to bleed alone. These sanctuaries would become monuments of survival, offering refuge, justice, and hope where once it was only despair. She would no longer be complicit in a system that had shattered her spirit under the pretense of mercy. She would never allow it again. She refused to let the machinery of greed and control dictate the lives of others any longer. Instead, she vowed to dismantle it from the inside out, using every resource at her disposal to expose its cracks, widen its fractures, and ultimately bring down its very foundations. This wasn't just rebellion. It was a revolution. The air thickened under the weight of her decision, pressing against her chest like a storm gathering force before unleashing its fury. Standing among the ruins of what once defined her, her resolve had hardened into something immovable, something eternal. The empire may have shaped her, but it would not define her. From this moment on, she would shape the world in her own image, not one born of privilege, but of purpose. Aurora felt as though she were stepping into an unknown realm, her feet cautious yet deliberate upon a land that seemed both alien and infinite. The path ahead was cloaked in uncertainty, its shape blurred by the weight of what she had endured and the enormity of what lay before her. But within that haze, one truth burned clear. She would never return to the empire, not its greed, not its corruption, not its cunning grip on those bold enough to dream beyond its walls. Luxury, once a glittering mirage promising wish fulfillment, vanished from her mind like morning fog under sunlight. In its place was a quiet defiance, pulsing relentlessly in her veins. This wasn't about running from her past. It was something deeper, a reclaiming of her will, a rewriting of her story, a rebuilding of her future brick by unbreakable brick. Her eyes had steeled over, reflecting a fire within, a flame burning brighter than ever before, fueled not by hatred, but by purpose. She was ready to tear down everything, wealth, power, legacy, if it meant setting things right not just for herself, but for all who had suffered beneath the suffocating shadow of men like her father and women like Denka. Systems designed to crush and consume without remorse would fall. Not even the ghost of her father's empire, whispering warnings on the wreckage, could stop her. The courtroom fell into a stunned silence, the kind that presses against your eardrums and steals your breath. When the gavel fell, it struck like a death sentence. Its sharp crack sliced through the tension like a blade through silk, echoing off the walls until it seemed to fill every corner of the room. There would be no leniency, no doubt. The fate of Denka and Calum was sealed. They sat side by side, pale and motionless, their bodies frozen beneath the weight of inevitability. Their faces, masks of horror etched so deeply they could have been carved in stone. It was over. The empire they'd built on lies, manipulation, and ruthless ambition crumbled around them. Its gilded pillars collapsed under the pressure of exposure and justice. 25 years, the judge declared. His voice was firm and unwavering, sentencing them for crimes that reached far beyond attempted murder and grand fraud. Each word landed like a hammer on steel, sealing their fates with ink too permanent to erase. The verdict struck harder than any physical blow, a seismic shockwave that left only devastation in its wake. Calum's face twisted in disbelief, his features contorted as though trying to escape reality itself. His mouth parted slightly, whispering soundless protests that never took form. His pride shattered into shards too sharp to gather. Beside him, Denka's eyes blazed with fury, a twin flame of rage and defiance flickering beneath the weight of consequence. The mask of charm and control she'd so carefully worn crumbled away, revealing unfiltered, untamed rage. Cornered, exposed, utterly defeated, she exchanged a fleeting glance with Calum, one heavy with unspoken blame, before they both bowed their heads under the weight of their shared collapse. Around them, reporters scribbled madly. Cameras flashed without pause, immortalizing every nuance of their downfall. But Aurora stood still, tall at the edge of the chaos. Her eyes remained fixed forward. To her, this moment wasn't a victory. It was vindication, and it was only the beginning. No words were spoken. There were no excuses, no pleas for mercy, no attempt to salvage the remnants of their broken lives. Any word they could speak fell hollow and meaningless in the face of their crimes. Everything they had built, the wealth amassed through deceit, the influence forged through manipulation, the empire erected on lies, was gone, reduced to ash by the very hands that had once built it. Now they were criminals, stripped of titles, power, and dignity, not destroyed by outside forces, but by their own insatiable greed. In the back of the courtroom, Aurora watched silently, her figure cloaked in an aura of quiet power that drew attention effortlessly. She hadn't come to gloat or to exact revenge. She came to witness justice, for the pain they had caused her family, and countless others crushed in their climb for control. Yet, when the moment arrived, satisfaction did not bloom in her chest. There was no surge of joy at their fall. This was no catharsis. It was a closure, and even that felt like the wrong word to describe the emptiness inside. She spoke no words of triumph, no stinging rebukes, no final statements to mark the end of their reign. Her silence was deliberate, an intentional punishment more devastating than any verbal blow. Denka and Calum cast furtive glances toward her, their eyes flickering like moths to a flame, desperately seeking any sign of emotion, any flicker of humanity that might acknowledge the havoc they'd caused. Aurora simply stared back. Her gaze was blank yet piercing, steady but devoid of hostility. She had nothing left to say. There was no anger to spill, no forgiveness to grant, no absolution to offer. Even if the courtroom burst into flames around her, she wouldn't have flinched. Their regrets, their apologies, their silent pleas for salvation, they meant nothing now. Words were cheap. Action spoke louder. What they had done couldn't be undone. What she had endured couldn't be erased. When the gavel struck one last time, its echo rang like the final note of a funeral hymn, sealing their fate with irreversibility. Aurora turned and walked away, the sound of the verdict fading behind her, drowned by the silence she carried within. A silence so deep it seemed to swallow every sound, every emotion, every memory of the life she once knew. It was a silence without forgiveness, for forgiveness required forgetting, and she would never forget. It was also a silence without closure, for closure implied healing, and though she had survived, she knew the scars would remain. What lingered instead was the bitter ache of betrayal, a sharp, constant reminder of how deeply she had been wounded, how thoroughly she had been tested, and how fiercely she had risen. Their downfall wasn't her peace. It was her proof that truth and justice, however delayed, always find their way home. The life of luxury Aurora once knew, the world of designer gowns sparkling beneath chandeliers, private jets whisking her to exclusive events, and glamorous parties flowing with champagne. felt like a distant dream. It was as if it belonged to someone else. None of it mattered anymore. The charm of wealth had been replaced by the raw reality of what truly counted. That world was irrelevant now, trivial in comparison to the storm of loss and betrayal that had reshaped her. She had been reborn in the fire of everything she lost, her innocence, her trust, her sense of self, and emerged stronger, forged by pain and redefined by resilience. Now, she stood at the center of her new life, not as a victim or the heiress of corruption, but as a woman determined to rebuild from the ground up. Step by relentless step, Aurora poured her energy into launching her own fashion brand. This wasn't about creating another label to fight for attention on glossy magazine pages. It was deeper than aesthetics or trends. It was about creating a symbol of survival, of endurance, of inner power. Every design told a story. Every stitch carried weight. Every fabric whispered truths long suppressed. Starting over wasn't easy, especially when the world still saw her through the lens of her past, as nothing more than the daughter of a corrupt empire built on greed and lies. Shame clung to her, skepticism clouded perception, and doubt nipped at her heels. But Aurora no longer feared. Fear had no place in the heart of someone who had faced the abyss and climbed out. Every stitch she sewed, every fabric she touched reminded her how far she'd come. From the hospital bed where she bled alone, to the courtroom where justice found its voice, to this very moment, standing tall in the chaos, ready to create a future on her terms. She wasn't just designing clothes. She was rebuilding herself, unraveling the threads of who she had been, and weaving them into something entirely new. The work was grueling, demanding every ounce of her focus and strength. Late nights bled into early mornings as she sketched designs, sourced materials, and met with artisans who believed in her vision. Doubt would sometimes creep in, whispering cruel reminders of failure and inadequacy, but she silenced it with action, channeling pain into purpose. Glamour no longer interested her. It felt hollow, disconnected from the hard truth of what she was building. This wasn't about proving anything to the world, which would always find ways to judge. It was about giving voice to silenced women like her, women broken by men like her father, men like Calum, men who believed they could crush spirits without consequence. Her mission became clear: to create something lasting, something that outlived passing trends and empty promises, something that empowered others to rise from despair, to reclaim their voices, their dignity. Each step forward healed her, never completely, for some wounds leave scars too deep to vanish, but enough to remind her that healing is possible. That growth comes through struggle. That light can emerge from darkness. With every collection she unveiled, every garment that walked the runway, Aurora wasn't just showcasing fashion. She was showcasing revolution, a testament to rebirth, resilience, and redemption. The fight had made her stronger. Aurora was no longer defined by her father's empire. She was a woman who fought for her place in the world, the woman who reclaimed her life, her voice, her future. After everything, her father's betrayal, Denka and Calum's cruelty, Aurora never imagined she'd allow herself to love again. Her heart had felt too broken to heal. But love, in its quiet, persistent way, found her when she least expected it. Daniel had been her constant, a steady presence in her darkest days. He believed in her, not as an heiress, but as a woman with her own strength. Loving him wasn't about replacing Ilias, the love she'd lost. It was about finding herself again. With Daniel, she didn't have to pretend or hide her scars. He saw her fully and loved her not despite her pain, but because of how she overcame it. Their love wasn't grand or dramatic. It wasn't about big gestures or loud declarations. It was quiet, steady, like a gentle breeze after a storm. In opening her heart to Daniel, Aurora discovered a different kind of love, one that didn't try to save her, one that simply let her be. In their shared moments, she found peace. The world didn't need to see their love. What mattered was that it was real. For the first time in years, Aurora felt whole. Standing on the edge of the cliff, the wind brushed her face as she looked out over the endless ocean. Once, these waters had threatened to swallow her. Now, they whisper a new story, her story. The past lingered, yes, but it no longer controlled her. She had fought and survived, victorious not just for herself, but for every woman who had been silenced, every woman who had been told she wasn't enough. Tears filled her eyes as she looked at Serafina, her daughter, standing beside her. Together, they had built this life. The ocean no longer held power over her. The wind that once carried her fears now lifted her spirit, whispering softly, "They thought I drowned, but I learned to swim." Her triumph was quiet, but it was hers. Every step had led her here, to this moment of quiet victory. And as the wind kissed her skin once more, Aurora knew she was no longer a woman destroyed by betrayal. She was a woman reborn from the ashes, and nothing could take that from her.